I've always loved reading, as I'm sure is the case with many of you. In fact, it's just my luck that the Gaithersburg Book Festival has always been held on the weekend of my birthday, which is coincidentally today. Fred Bowen, thank you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear.
Changes.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, okay. So Fred Bowen was born in Boston and has 4 elder brothers as well as 2 younger sisters. He's been a sports enthusiast since childhood, enjoying a variety of sports such as football, baseball, and basketball, both watching and playing with his father and siblings. Later, he majored in history from the University of Pennsylvania, and after graduating, he attended George Washington Law School. He practiced law for many years before retiring to follow his passion, writing sports fiction novels. Aside from that, he writes a Thursday Kids Sports column in the Washington Post and is a proliferous reader. Today, we have 3 types of kids: kids who love sports, kids who love books, and that small middle ground, kids who love both. Sports fiction is one of my favorite genres because every one of those groups can relate to these books. When I learned that I would introduce Fred, I was elated. One of my favorite memories was from 5 to 6 summers ago when I went to the library and checked out 70-odd books, and I remember utterly tearing through around 15 of his sports fiction books. Now, I'll warn you, once you pick up one of his books, you simply will not be able to put it down. We are in for a treat today. Please assist me in welcoming Fred Bowen, introducing his book, Lucky Enough.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, a round of applause for anybody who made it through the mud. I mean, all right, let's hear it for those people, all right? Somehow, I've been here 8 times in the last 9 years, and they think, well, we can put Fred out way in the distance or something. But that's right. My introduction is all true. I grew up in Marblehead, Massachusetts, in a big Irish Catholic family, which, if anybody is knows anything about the 1950s, big and Irish Catholic families, that's a redundant statement. All Irish Catholic families were big. We had 7 kids, and we were all sports crazy. We all liked to do things. And so it was natural for me to start to figure out that, hey, maybe I'd like to write sports books. But I'll tell you about a couple of things that I do. One, I do the Kids Post column every Thursday. Who knows about the Kids Post? All right, good. I feel like I'm among friends here. 18 years ago, the Washington Post came up with a great idea. They started to figure out that a lot of kids were not reading this part of the paper because it's for adults. But they started a page that was just for kids, and they gave me the best job. They said, Fred, how would you like to write about sports every week for the Washington Post? And I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to pay me to do this. And I was a lawyer at the time, and so it was sort of my side job at the time. And I've been doing it for 18 years. And if you, anybody's quick with math, about 50 columns a year, 18 years is, anybody? 900 columns. So I've been doing more than 900 columns in the last few years, or in the last 18 years. The great part of it is I can write about pretty much anything I want. This is just a sample of some of the things that I've written about in the last few weeks. Last week was lacrosse, and a few things. Maryland has got a team, both their men's and women's team are the number 1 seeded teams in the NCAA tournament this year. Also, lacrosse for the last 6-7 years has been the biggest growing sport in the country. This one, it isn't very often that a sports writer writes about Dancing with the Stars. But I wrote about Dancing with the Stars because one of the contestants there, and I'm going to mess up her name, I'm sure, Ariki Agunbowale, who was the women basketball player who hit the 2 buzzer beaters, was a contestant on Dancing with the Stars. But the important thing is, I think they're going to let her keep the money that she earned. And so one of the biggest columns that I ever wrote, it still gets clicks all over the place, is I wrote a column about should college athletes be paid? And you're saying yes, the camera person is saying yes. All right, let's take a vote here. Who thinks they should be paid? Who thinks they shouldn't be paid? Who's not thinking right now? Okay, there we go. All right. The parents are not thinking right now. Isn't it? Right. No, it's a very, very difficult issue. But one of the things is that the everybody else is getting paid. It's not like there are the football coaches, I believe, 47 of the Division I football coaches make $2 million or more. No, that may be the basketball coaches. But the football coaches do very well, too. My son, who is 34 years old, he is the associate head baseball coach at UMBC. I can attest that the baseball coaches do not do as well as the basketball and football coaches. But, whoops, another article was on the basketball playoffs, and I want to show you how smart I am. All right, I talked about the Philadelphia 76ers, and I said, can the 76ers beat the Boston Celtics and move on to the Eastern Conference Finals? The Celtics are tough, but the 76ers have talent. I think the 76ers will move on. Whenever I predict, I'm about half right, you know, between two teams. Wrote about the Boston Marathon, first American woman to win in 33 years. Ryan Zimmerman, this one was interesting. Does anybody remember that Ryan Zimmerman didn't play any practice, or he didn't play the usual number of practice games this spring training? Well, he got off to a really slow start. In other words, he was trying to save himself from getting injured or beat up over the course of the season, but he got off to such a slow start, I don't think anybody's going to do this. Who is watching the Capitals? No Capitals fans here? Oh, you're all right, a Capitals fan. The Capitals are going to kill me. They are going to, I mean, they won the first 2 games in Tampa Bay, and then they lose the next 2 games. And I've already done research on the Stanley Cup, by the way, which is the coolest sports trophy in the world. Do you know that it is now the tradition with the Stanley Cup since 1993 that each player on the winning team gets to have the cup for 24 hours. And 2 babies have been baptized in the Stanley Cup. I mean, is that cool? And people, you can kind of do anything. You can do anything you want for 24 hours with maybe the coolest sports trophy of all. And what they do is they have everybody's name is on the cup, but now they have 5 bands that can fit 13 teams, and when they fill up the 5th band, what they do is they remove the top band and send it to the Hall of Fame. But I'm hoping that Capitals will move on to play for the Stanley Cup, or I've done all that research for no reason, except for maybe next year's column. One of my favorite ones that I did a couple of months ago, I talked about what I thought was the greatest shootout in the history of basketball. And it was a high school game in Iowa, and it had happened 50 years ago, state championship. One girl scored 76 points for her team. The other girl, Denise Long, scored 64. I don't think anybody's ever scored that many points, two people. But what I'm going to do today is to talk a little bit about the books I write. And I've written 23 books. And what they do is they combine sports fiction, sports history, and there's always a chapter of sports history in the back. Let me show you a few of them. This one's called Double Reverse, and obviously it's a football book. And what it's about really is sometimes people say to me, they'll say, Fred, why is it that you write about sports? And I'll say, well, actually, yeah, I write about sports, but the books are really about something different than sports. This is really about appearances. And the main character in the book, a kid named Jesse, is a kid who's got an older brother and his older brother is the high school quarterback. And he's big, he's got a great arm, he looks like a quarterback. And Jesse's playing for his middle school team, and his quarterback gets hurt, and his older brother says, why don't you play quarterback? And he says, well, I don't look like a quarterback. But there's lots of times in sports when the person who doesn't look like he or she could play the part is really good. Who's heard of Cal Ripken here? We're in Maryland. Cal Ripken was 6'4", about 220 pounds. At the beginning of his career, they said, quote, you are too big to play shortstop. Cal Ripken played shortstop for about 2,500 games. He's going to probably go to or is he already in the Hall of Fame? I think he is in the Hall of Fame. He is in the Hall of Fame, well deserved. There's so many times, the kid who is too short, oh, well, you can't play basketball. Tyrone Muggsy Boggs who came from Baltimore, played, I believe, 12 years in the NBA. He was 5'3.5" tall. He was an extremely useful player. Happens all the time. Oh, so-and-so doesn't look like a shortstop or a quarterback or a big forward or something like that. But this one is a soccer book. I think I saw somebody with it somewhere. Ah, there we go. What it's really about is about sportsmanship. And so that's the message in this one. Outside Shot is about a kid who defines himself as a shooter. In fact, I'm going to read a little bit from Outside Shot, if I could. I wrote it in the first person. Any of the kids know what the first person is? Go ahead. Whoops, got a shout from Mr. Bowen. Right, the person in the story is telling the story, so it's all I and, that kind of thing. And this one is it's a kid named Richie. But he starts off, this is how the book starts. He goes, I'm the shooter. That's what I do. That's who I am. When the basketball leaves my hands, it's going in the bucket. I just know it. Not every time. Not even Stephen Curry is that good. But most of the time. Don't ask me where I got my ability to shoot hoops. I sure didn't inherit it. My mom and dad are great, but they couldn't care less about sports. Dad's an English professor. He spends his time reading Shakespeare instead of the sports section. Mom's a pediatrician. She says she has more important stuff to do than thinking about putting a ball in the net. My older sister Jeannie might have been a good player if she'd ever tried, but she's into high school musicals and stuff like that. She doesn't have time for sports. I don't think she could throw a ball into the ocean if she was standing knee-deep in the water. No, I got to be great at shooting another way. Practice. A whole lot of practice. When I was 8 years old, we moved into the house where we live now. There was a regulation 10-foot basketball hoop in the driveway. I was new to the neighborhood, and I didn't know anybody. That basketball hoop was my best friend. Even though I've always been pretty big for my age, I had trouble getting the ball in the basket at first. But I kept at it. I practiced all the time, trying to learn the shots I'd seen on TV. I spent hours and hours shooting hoops, playing games in my head. Finally, I worked out a shot of my own. I would dribble up the right side of the driveway, get a running start, and sling the ball from my right hip. Man, I never missed that one. After a few months, our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Moore, looked over the fence. I declare, Richie Mallon, she called out, you are getting awfully good at shooting that basketball. After that, I practiced even harder. I kept at it, and a couple years later, Bryce Cooper, he's my best friend now, asked me to sign up with his basketball team at the Recreation Center. Mr. Petty was our coach and a really nice guy. He was a huge North Carolina Tar Heels fan. Anyway, at the start of our first game, I got the ball and dribbled up the right side just like I was back in my driveway. I pushed the ball up from my right hip and swish. The next time I got the ball, I did the exact same thing, nothing but net. As we were running back to play defense, the other team's coach leaped up, pointed at me, and yelled, "Who's got the shooter?" The shooter. I like the sound of that. He was talking about me. So, it's about a kid who sees himself as, oh, I'm the shooter. I'm this. Well, sometimes in sports, you don't want to define yourself so narrowly. Oh, I'm one thing. By the way, I was a lawyer many, many years ago and did it for 30 years. But what changed my life, my wife, who's been a huge help with all the books and stuff, she was a reporter on a local newspaper more than 30 years ago, and somebody came up to me at a party and said, "Fred, you like to talk, you're funny, you like movies. How would you like to write movie reviews for me?" She was the editor of the paper. And if I had said, "No, I'm just a lawyer, you know, I'm not a writer, I'm not a movie reviewer," I wouldn't be standing here right now. It was that kind of got me started into writing movie reviews, then I did video reviews, and then when my children came along, I was really kind of shocked that my wife didn't want me to go out, you know, and just watch movies by myself. That was kind of disappointing. So I had to give up my movie column, and when the kids got old enough, I started reading sports books to my son, and I didn't think they were very good. I thought, gee, I could write a better book than this. But the thing that I had done is I had experience writing for an audience, and so I thought I could pull it off. Now, let's see. This is the latest book, lucky enough. And it's a baseball book, and it's about baseball superstitions. And I think I'll read a little bit from the back about some of the superstitions. Because every one of my books always has a history chapter in the back. And those are really fun. And like he was saying, our birthday boy there was saying, by the way, did I mention it was my birthday? No, it isn't. You know, I thought, wow, what a great way to get, you know, sung happy birthday, you know. Just say, hey, it's my birthday. Well, I won't tell that story. I was thinking about something else. All right. So I had to do research on a whole bunch of baseball superstitions. And baseball is full of superstitions. Maybe it's because the game is so hard. Think of trying to hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Some players believe they need a little bit of help or a little bit of luck to be successful. And so here are some of the examples of the people that I found. Famous baseball players, some not so famous, and what their superstitions were. Honus Wagner, who was a Hall of Fame shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates from 1900 to 1917, believed that a bat only had so many hits in it. In other words, once he had gotten enough hits, well, we got to put that bat away. That one's running too hot. He would stop using a bat after 100 hits. And he ended up with 3,420 hits. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was one of the great players. Willie Stargell, another guy for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I almost said Steelers. That would not be good. You know, hey, the expert in sports doesn't know anything. You know? All right. But he played from 1962 to 1982, another Hall of Famer. Would not use a Willie Stargell model bat. He would only use other people's bats. There were Willie Stargell model bats. Willie Stargell wouldn't use them. And worked pretty well. He hit 475 home runs. Wade Boggs of the Boston Red Sox. Anybody remember him? Hall of Fame third baseman. Terrific player. He ate chicken before every ball game. They called him the Chicken Man. But he also had other superstitions. He started his batting practice at the exact same time before every night game, 5:17. He took 150 grounders, no more, no less, before every game. And then he would, every time he got into the batter's box, with the bat, make the Hebrew sign for life, a high, C-H-A-I, all right? He'd make that sign at the top of the batter's box. I do not believe that Wade Boggs was Jewish. In other words, this is a superstition. Now, again, worked out very, very well for him, all right? If you notice, there are some baseball players, they will not step on the foul lines. They will go and they will step over the foul lines. They think that stepping on the foul line is bad luck. There was a pitcher, Mel Stottlemyre for the Yankees, never stepped on the foul line until one day he stepped on the foul line. Here's what happened. The first batter smashed a ball right off of Stottlemyre's left leg for a hit. The next 4 Twins batters got hits, including 3 base hits, and the Twins scored 5 runs in the first inning. Stottlemyre said, quote, "I haven't stepped on a foul line since." Superstition. Does it make any sense? Not really. A lot of people, Tony La Russa, famous manager, had a lucky warm-up jacket. Jim Leland wore the same pair of boxer shorts, unwashed, during any of his team's winning streaks. Now, think about that for a second. Let's say, the longest winning streak, I think, is something like 22 games. That wouldn't be good. Wouldn't be good. Tim Lincecum, who pitched for the Giants from 2007 to 2016, in fact, won 2 Cy Young Awards, wore one hat for 9 years. Just one hat. All right? Other things. The other thing, too, was that it's thought to be, you jinx a pitcher if you mention that he has a no-hitter. And so it makes a very, very difficult situation for the announcers, since the announcers they're sort of like journalists, and they want to give the news to the people who are coming into the game or are just dropping in to listen to the game. And so there was a famous game in which Don Larson threw a no-hitter, in fact, a perfect game, in the 1956 World Series. And who was it? It was Mel Allen, who wanted to get around that. And so instead of saying, Larson has a no-hitter, he said, Allen mentioned at some point, the Yankees have all the hits in the game. He didn't say it directly, but he was, hey, you may want to stay tuned here because the Yankees have all the hits. Another announcer, this is a wonderful quote, Lindsey Nelson, didn't worry about telling his listeners about a no-hitter. Nelson said, "I figure if anything I say in the broadcasting booth can influence anything going on down on the field, I ought to be getting more money. So those are the books. What I'd really like to do right now is take questions and also maybe talk a little sports. Who are sports fans here? I would hope that everybody's a sports fan. When you really think of it, sports is one of those things that really brings people together. And people are really passionate about it. You know, and I love the history of the sports. In fact, I did some research into the National Football League. I don't know if you noticed, but the other day it was announced that the Carolina Panthers are going to be sold, and they will be sold for $2.2 billion. I did some research into this recently. The National Football League started almost 100 years ago. It was started actually in a auto dealership in Canton, Ohio. Some teams got together and they started to make the rules for the league. And one of the rules was, if you want to be in the league, you have to pay $100 to be in the league. And later, George Halas, who was at that meeting, said, oh, nobody paid the money. He said, I doubt there was $100 in the room. Now, those franchises are worth billions of dollars. In fact, they now think that a franchise like the Dallas Cowboys would be worth $4 billion or even more than $4 billion. So who has any questions? And also, just even if you just want to say something about sports generally, feel free. Go ahead, raise your hand. Adults are good too. Go ahead. Oh, what's my favorite sport to write books about? I think it's baseball because baseball is a sport that you can summarize very quickly and say like, oh, it's bottom of the fourth inning, there are 2 runners on, 2 out, so-and-so's at bat. You can drop people into a dramatic moment in the game and then take it up from there. The hardest sport I find to write about is soccer. Soccer is sort of undifferentiated action for about an hour, occasionally punctuated by a goal. And so it's very hard to describe that. There are a lot of things going on. And by the way, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful game for kids to play. I coached it. I played it in high school. I think it's a great game. Hard to describe. Very hard to describe. Go ahead.
And what's your favorite one to watch?
What's my favorite one to watch? My favorite one to watch is baseball, too. I like, well, one of the things is, like I mentioned, my son is the associate head baseball coach at UMBC. And I wrote a column about this. I'll go to schools and I speak at schools to talk to kids about the writing process. In fact, I'm going to do a workshop on, keeping a sports journal, and I'm going to do it at 3:30. And I wrote a column, it was, I'd say 2 years ago. Kids ask me all the time, who's your favorite team? And I thought, my favorite team, they want me to say, oh, the Nationals, or I used to be a huge Red Sox fan. Or I used to also say, well, my favorite football team's the Redskins. And the kids would say, well, why? And I'd say, because they're a perfect example of how not to do everything. You know, I mean, they just mess things up all the time. They just like, oh, we got a really quarterback. Why don't we just treat him really badly, and then he'll leave? You know, so there, yeah, it's but, oh, by the way, the Redskins write their own columns. You know, you just say, oh, I'll write about the Redskins. People are very passionate about them. But my favorite team, as I explained to the kids, I said, my favorite team is my son's team. And when my daughter was playing in high school, she went to Einstein High School. She played softball and field hockey, which she just loved. Those were my favorite teams. And so I was telling the kids, if you play on a team, that's your favorite team. that's the one that you should like the best. And so, any other questions? Oh, come on. Don't be shy. Oh, go ahead.
What's the most obscure thing you found out in baseball?
Oh, boy. Wow, most obscure thing I've found out in baseball. Boy, I haven't gotten that question, I can tell you. Yeah, right. I can't really, I don't know. I was thinking recently, though, I'm going to do the speaker's trick of not answering your question, but trying to say something interesting. I was thinking recently about Cal Ripken, and I was thinking that, he broke a record that nobody thought would be broken. What was it, 2,130 games. I believe he broke it by more than 500 games, and my guess is no one in Major League Baseball right now has played 500 consecutive games. And I was thinking that's sort of an obscure thing, but that would make the point of how difficult it was for what he did. It was such a, when I was growing up, nobody's going to break Gehrig's record. That's unbreakable. And sometimes you think, actually, who is it? The other day, somebody was saying, if he keeps playing, Ovechkin has a chance to catch Gretzky. And I thought, no, there's no way you can kick. Gretzky was, but, they sort of, you'd have to have good years. You'd have to keep, but could happen. So, I mean, it's interesting, all the records and things and how they, things where you thought, that would never happen. For example, believe me, when I was growing up as a Red Sox fan, I had given up on the Red Sox ever winning the World Series. In fact, when they lost in 1986 to the Mets, when they were down to the last strike, and nobody was out, nobody was on, and there were 2 runs up, I remember thinking, I thought, I gotta call my mother so that she saves the Boston Globe. But God heard that and said, that is the sin of presumption. In other words, you think something's going to happen just because you want it. Well, they lost, and I remember going home. I was watching with a friend of mine at his house. We were both big Red Sox fans, and we were stunned, of course. And I went home, and my son Liam was in, the big boy bed because he was like 2 or 3. And I just sort of laid my hand on his shoulder, and I thought, maybe they'll win it in your lifetime, but they're not going to win it in mine. I just thought they're never going to do it. And so what do? 2004, they're 3 games behind the Yankees. They've been totally embarrassed. They're behind in the 9th inning. And who comes in from the bullpen but the angel of death, Mariano Rivera. And you thought, there's no way in the world they're going to come back. And they did. And that is one of the most wonderful things about sports, is just how the unexpected happens all the time. By the way, my son is the baseball coach at UMBC. Let's hear it for the UMBC basketball team. There isn't anybody who thought, when they were filling out their bracket, they just, give me UMBC. They're going to beat Virginia, no problem. Well, that's right. That's right. Whoever bet on them, which, by the way, brings up an interesting question. Betting is about to be legalized all over the place. I'm thinking about writing a column just saying, listen, just run the numbers on this. If you bet on things, it's really kind of dumb. Anybody, actually, this is a joke. I don't mean it, all right? Okay? I kind of think anybody who plays the lottery shouldn't be able to vote. haven't you figured out that, like, the chances of you winning are, like, almost... And, in fact, this is one thing that should be a law. The other one I'm just kidding about. This should be a law, and that is anyone who plays the lottery gives up their right to complain about taxes because they're volunteering. They're saying, oh, yeah, I'll pay more, because you probably won't win. You're going to lose your money. So there you go. I don't know. It'll be very interesting, though, see what happens. And going back to that article I wrote about whether or not college athletes should be paid, well, they're going to look around, and they're going to be seeing billions of dollars being gambled away, and they're not being paid. Watch out. Watch this space for a point shaving scandal. By the way, I was a little scared when the guy with the Redskins hat came straight over. I thought, like, oh, he heard me talking about the Redskins, and he said, uh-oh, I've been sent by Daniel Snyder to say that you shouldn't say those things about the Redskins. All right, it's okay? All right, good. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, comment on what appropriate behavior would be toward referees. I mean, I see like professional basketball.
Yeah.
Just like they can question anything.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. While both of my kids were growing up, I coached all their teams. I figured it out. I coached more than 30 different youth teams. And it was great research for the columns. It was great research for the books. And it was a lot of fun. I remember I did all my son's teams. And my daughter is 5 years younger than my son. And then my wife looks at me and says, Bo, you're not going to coach all of Carrie's teams too, are you? And I said, I have to. If I didn't, no woman in the neighborhood would speak to me. I said, this is crazy. By the way, the girls' teams were great. I had a girls' team, or actually I had a baseball team, 7 boys, 7 girls. I got to write about girls should play baseball again. But appropriate behavior in youth leagues towards referees is I told all the kids at the beginning of the year, anyone who even mentions the referees will sit. In other words, I don't want the parents mentioning them. I will not mention them. I believe that in a youth game, the referees are like the weather. They're just there. And I wrote a column at the end of last year. I was up in Massachusetts, and there was this wonderful sign that said, and it was outside a Little League park, it says, remember, these are games, we are children, the coaches are volunteers, the referees are human, and you didn't play for the Red Sox. And I just thought, that's a great sign. I love that sign, so I made a column out of it. In professional athletics, I understand why, they work the referee and all that kind of stuff, but I still think it's just a terrible, terrible example to kids. The other thing I think that is a terrible example, instant replay. I am against it. I've written against it like 3 different times. And the reason I think it is it gives the kids the message, all the calls have to be perfect. And if you notice in life, have you noticed that things aren't perfectly fair? That some kids seem to get everything. Other kids really struggle with things. Some people are, born in, with the proverbial silver spoon in their mouth. Like, who's the guy who got married today? Didn't he pull a lucky number? He gets to be, oh, I'm Prince Harry. Like, who says? By the way, the English royal family, I'm really Irish, and so I have one thing to say about the English royal family. They started off by saying, we are ordained by God to rule over most of the world. That was their argument. Their argument now is, we're good for tourism. Isn't that a bit of a come down from being ordained by God to... But, did I answer your question? Anybody else have a question? You do. All right.
How do you feel about participation?
How do I feel about participation trophies? I've written a couple of times on it. And what I said is up to a certain age, I think they're okay. In other words, maybe, and it's interesting, and I when I wrote the column, I would go to schools and I'd ask kids about, who thinks you should get a trophy all the time, no matter what. And up until about third grade, a lot of kids said, oh, yeah, I'd like to get the trophy. And then around third grade, they start to catch on that it's condescending and that it doesn't really mean much, and that Montgomery County, God bless them, and some of the teams that I coached, they would send around, like, what were they? They weren't trophies, but they were some sort of, something like that. They about that size, or you say, oh, you participated, and I'd just throw them away because I didn't think they were important to the kids, and I don't think they were. But we did win our league one time, and I forget what grade it was. It was my daughter's basketball team. And, oh, those girls were one of those trophies. The other story that I tell is that I used to give out, when I was a coach, I would give out a game ball in baseball or softball, and it wasn't for the best player. It was for the kid who made the best defensive play during the game. And what I wanted the kids to be thinking was, oh, I want to make a play instead of, oh, I don't want to make a mistake. And in basketball, I used to give out every game an award, and same in soccer for hustle, the kid who worked the hardest out there. So, because I wanted them to be working hard. And it was funny, one year I was giving out game balls on my baseball team, and some mother, who, very, very nice woman, I believe she was a psychologist, said, Fred, wouldn't it be nice if everybody got a game ball? And I said, sorry, I'm just going to give it out for the kid who makes the best play. Well, that game, her son made a wonderful catch in left field, bases loaded, kind of saved the game, as I recall. We were also a little bit surprised. He wasn't a great athlete. 5 years later, I went into their house. On their mantle, there was that ball. In other words, he had earned it. He was proud. So, any other questions? Should we sing Happy Birthday one more time? No. That's all right. Listen, thanks for coming out. Also, thanks for coming through the mud. Actually, it's funny, as I was looking out, there were some people who were actually moving over here, and they gave up. They literally gave up. They said, nah, we can't make it. And he doesn't sound that good anyway, Yeah, you're right. I didn't think about that either. I was going to do, by the way, in just a moment of being an optimist, I was going to do the entire talk in my sunglasses, figuring that maybe, just maybe, it will bring the sun out. Obviously, we will never see the sun ever again. But thank you very much for coming out. I hope you had a good time.